one thing I find so interesting talking to you is this jewelry world is so different from the world that I live in. I'm curious just about your origin. How did you find your way into this industry, and how did you decide to start a jewelry brand?
If the listeners are not aware already, I have the privilege to be a descendant of Louis Cartier. Louis Cartier was the iconic designer behind the namesake brand. He was really the innovator and visionary. So you can make an assumption that's the reason why I'm in the jewelry business, but it's actually not how this happened. By the time I was born, Cartier had been sold to another entity. So I wasn't raised crawling around the boutiques in Paris or really immersed in the jewelry world. It was just sort of a background, obviously fact and story of our family, but I was not predestined to be in the jewelry world. Or maybe I was, because one day I got called for an interview at one of those famous French jewelry companies that were famous and started around the same time. I was interviewing for a sales position there, and I remember walking into their store. Place Vendôme is the epicenter of high jewelry in the world. I walked into that boutique and I immediately felt, I wouldn't say at home, but so enthralled with the environment and the beauty and magnificence of the jewelry, but also the architecture of the store. It's just so attractive, everything that I looked at and where I was. So from there, I got a position at that specific company called Showroom. And then immediately as I started working there, I spent some time in the workshops. And these companies have workshops underneath the rooftops in that same area where the best jewelers in the world literally are working. I was just fascinated with the craftsmanship. The time that it takes to build a piece of jewelry from scratch is actually something that most people don't appreciate. The technology has advanced so much now that it's different than when I started 20 some years ago, but the craft and the skill set that these guys had was just fascinating to me. And then I learned about diamonds, and it just became my career from there. And my heritage and my descendants from Cartier did not play an active role as I was employed by different companies.
What was that first role, your
I
first
was in
job?
sales. I was a high jewelry salesperson. So high jewelry is defined as these pieces that are one of a kind that typically have gemstones that are irreplaceable. That's how you define high jewelry. Obviously, it starts at a certain price point. So immediately it's positioned me working with pieces that were astonishing, rare, and also meet the customers who are most likely to buy them, which at a very young age exposed me to wealthy, successful, most of the time charismatic, interesting people. And that was also part of what I found so appealing to my position at a young age. Not just what I did for a living, but also who I got to meet and the environment that I got to be in.
What was the training like? I mean, I imagine you're getting into this high jewelry sales. It's not probably not, you don't walk in and then they just hand you a name tag and say, okay, talk to the next customer. What's the sort of 0 to 100 there? How do you get started?
I think sales position, sales job are relationship based. It's what's important is the kind of personality that you have, but you do have to have an understanding of the technique. And this is what that immersion into the workshop, sitting at a bench, they had me sit at a bench for a whole month building a box. I built a box out of non-precious metals, but they wanted me to appreciate what cutting, tracing, cutting, polishing, filing, bending, heating entail. And once you do that, trying to build something very basic, then you have this huge appreciation for what it's like to build a ring that has curves and volume and roundness and detail. Think of jewelry as a very small, compact object where you need to create structure and architecture and design and volumes. So building that box gave me an appreciation to do that. And also, I was sitting there with a master on my right and a master on my left. And so I could see how they work. The funny thing is that their work is so precise that they typically have a really jovial, joking environment in these workshops, because that's like the release valve from the work that they're doing. And I got to really appreciate the skills that it took, and also the hand gestures, the way they move their hands, use their tools, drop them, pick them up, touch the metal. I just admired it, loved it. And it's something that you also convey. Once you understand that, you can speak to clients and make them, as best as you can, appreciate what goes into making this very expensive piece of jewelry. And the best case scenario is actually when you take these same customers, clients, and you walk them to a workshop. At the time it was still possible, and they see what it takes to make these pieces, and it makes the price taking a back seat into the consideration for the object. Like, I started at a moment where every piece of jewelry that I touched was one of a kind.
Wow.
They only purchased the best gemstones available in the world. And think 25 years back, we were shipping internationally, but the origin of this industry is the Cartiers and others traveled the globe for months, weeks and months at a time to find emeralds and rubies and sapphires and diamonds. I'm talking going way back. But by the time I started, they would be brought the best stones that the world had to offer, and I would get to see them, and I would get to develop a photographic memory. So the only way to really appreciate how beautiful a ruby or a diamond or any gemstone is, you have to have seen the best of it and like the worst of it. And then if you can remember everything in between, because you've seen the best and the worst, then you've built up a memory of what gemstone quality is. And that's only through experience. So then they exposed me to that. I spent a lot of time with the buyers and looked at all these stones that would come and said, this is why this is beautiful. This is why this is interesting. And there is your own taste and personality, your appreciation of beauty that comes on, that layers on top of that training, if you will, which I think is what I carried through this Jean Dousset brand today. I carried that learning mixed in with my own personal appreciation of what beauty should be like.
I often hear you talking about how you don't look externally for, or other jewelers or other designers for motivation, that you find your kind of inspiration internally. Where does that come from? Is it largely formed from this early part of your career when you were in these jewelry houses sitting next to these artisans, or where does that come from?
I think that I had an incline for design early on, but it wasn't fully formed, and I don't think I had any confidence attached to it. So it wasn't mature that way. I always had ideas looking at something, and I always thought of maybe a different way to do it, or maybe it inspired me to have some kind of an idea. I think everything that I saw for the earlier part of my career definitely built in my own taste and aesthetic, developed it. What I do today as a jewelry designer is I don't look at anything anybody does, because I'd like to think of myself as an innovator and as a creator. So I hold myself to the standard of not copying anything. So it has limitations, because that means that I can only do so much, I can only create so much. But at the same time, it does carry that satisfaction that the work that I'm putting out there, to the best of my ability, obviously, because you can't reinvent the wheel all the time doing what we do. But to the best of my ability, I feel that my fingerprint is on the jewelry, the rings, and the designs that I create. They really come through images that are brief, that can come at any time during the day. I never sit down and think of designing. I just think of lines, think of movements, regardless of where I'm at or where I am or what time of the day it is. And then I transfer that into a note, sometimes a very shorthand sketch, even though I don't know how to train formally design. But that's enough for me to convey the idea to somebody that can turn that into a design. And then from the base of that idea, I correct, nuance, adapt the design until it looks like everything that I'm looking for and that I like. Jewelry design is about holding on to the stones. If you work with gemstones, right, diamonds and so forth, you have to securely hold on to them, which compels you to create design that has structural elements to it. You can't go around the fact that it needs to hold on securely and for a long time. My design approach is to how do I remove the structural elements from jewelry or turn them into something that's actually appreciable visually. That's my mantra of design. Remove the structure, enhance the viewpoint of the stone, right? I'm trying to unblock the view of the stone, the perspective of the stone, while maintaining structure. And one of my latest design is a perfect representation of that. I feel like it's the most accomplished ring design that I have created. I have a particular sensitivity for rings. I remember when I was a young salesman, I loved the idea of showing diamonds to people, engagement ring, anniversary ring, and whatnot, and then create design around them. I love the relationship that it creates between you and the person. So this is why rings are so prevalent into my design and collections.
And so going back to that, your time as a salesperson, you started and then you had this month where you're sitting in the workshop working on this box. And then what was next? What came after that?
After that, I was in the store, and it's a very slow traffic kind of stores, right?
No one's booking online at that time.
At the time, the struggle that these big famous brands that you know of today were dealing with is that their entire history so far had been written with elite, the wealthiest of the wealthiest, through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. And they were coming up against the fact that they needed a new crop of customers. They needed to be more democratic. They need to remove the curtains off the doors. They need to make these places less intimidating. So I'm arriving in the jewelry world right at that moment. How do we, us institutions of the high jewelry world, make our stores more accessible and also make jewelry that's you can purchase without spending $100,000 or $50,000? And that's the beginning of that shift. And so I worked in those stores. There was like the beginning of these more accessible, affordable, call it jewelry lines from these big brand names. I remember the first day I sold something, my hands were shaking because I was nervous. And then once I got the hang of it, I was just a natural. Like this level of interaction representing a product that creates that kind of response, emotional response for people, I absolutely loved. Imagine working in one of the most significant architectural places in Paris, working for one of the most famous brand names there is in the jewelry space, showing something that's extremely rare to people that you've come into contact with. The whole experience is thrilling. That as a job is a fantastic experience. And it's something that I carry today, one that I want people to have when they come to Jean Dousset. I want them to have the same level of experience that I used to procure and had with my clients when I was a young salesman. It should be something memorable. So that was that. And then little by little, I started selling more and more expensive items. And then I started traveling the world. And then my career was really interesting. I went around the world. I represented not just this brand, but then moved on to the next one and then to the next one. And yet always, better yet, incredible pieces with incredible craftsmanship and gemstones.
What do you think it was that made you so good in that job?
That's an excellent question.
It just, it strikes me that it's a complex sale. It's not, you're not selling a used car. You're not high pressure convincing someone. It's much more nuanced. And I'm sure that there's a lot that goes into kind of how do you identify who's serious, who's just looking, who needs a little more information, who wants to be left alone. I imagine there's a
So
lot.
at that time, it was more ceremonial than that. Like people that walked into these boutiques were typically not just looking, typically not really just looking. And if they were not actively buying something, they were falling into the category of people that would. I think that when I was a kid, I was by myself a lot from a very young age, and I became very social, very engaging. I was always looking for mentors. Mentors are a big part of my story, big part of my story. So I think I was just creating rapport with people right away because it was like my way of being. The product kind of speaks for itself. I represent a brand that has nothing else to prove. I'm just the last link that delivers the product to the client, the relationship building, the ability to make people feel comfortable and appreciate you as a person makes the last mile possible. People might have been rooting for this really young guy, 23 years old, handling these really expensive, precious pieces. And, maybe there was a part of them that wanted to support in some ways, because I think that's how this whole mentorship appears in my life. I was really excited about what I was doing. I was really happy that these people were here. I was really happy to engage with them. And I think that the combination of all of that made me a successful salesperson from the beginning. And I also was really, this is the world I can't, now in hindsight, I know, but this is the world I wanted to be in. This is the world I thought was so fascinating.
From the time you were a kid?
From the time I got into these boutiques and stores
Okay.
and I got exposed to that, I was like, wow, this is incredible.
What was your exposure like to it when you were a kid, like when you were a teenager? I know you mentioned that the Cartier brand had been sold before, but was it still a part of your sort of family's kind of culture, so to speak, or?
It's actually a strange, it's almost difficult to explain because it's there, but we don't talk about it as much as you think we should be talking about it since it's so important. Like, how come, like, the fact that my grandfather is Louis Cartier's daughter's son, not more prevalent into our family culture? Like, why don't we not? There are objects from Cartier, like over the house, heirlooms and things, but there's no massive amounts of jewelry, first of all. Money is a different topic. The way money was distributed and spent is also probably part of that. We had a beautiful house in the southwest of France that was bought by Louis Cartier, inherited by my grandfather. But I think it was the past. And I think that because my grandfather never actively worked for Cartier, and also there's a complex family dynamic, I think it just wasn't like everywhere. So to be honest, I didn't really grow up thinking that I was this closely related to Cartier, even though I knew, but I didn't live as if I was. Both of my parents were in different industries, different activities. Cartier was long gone. We were not really talking about it. So it was in the back of my mind. I remember one day I worked for Van Cleef. When I moved to Los Angeles, I interviewed for Los Angeles magazine, and I said in the article, I am a descendant of Louis Cartier. And I remember my boss at Van Cleef telling me, don't say that.
Why do you think he said that?
I'm not sure, because I would think it would seem like a good value added to having somebody who was that kind of sort of backstory, credential, call it credibility. But she said, don't mention it. That was the first time in my life that I actually mentioned it in the context of jewelry before I obviously started my own namesake brand. And even when I did start it, that wasn't the first thing I said. First of all, I never introduced myself as a descendant of Cartier. People like to say it, but I never said it. And I also was really careful. I wanted to make sure that I could exist on my own, that I could develop a sense of self as a designer or as a jeweler before I started putting that against the backdrop of the family heritage, the family descendants. I didn't feel like you could just come out and say, I am a jewelry designer because, or you should buy my jewelry because. I think that being a designer in and of itself depends entirely on how people accept, receive, and judge your work, right? Whether it sells or it doesn't sell. Once I got more down that path of becoming more of me, myself as a designer, then I started elevating the background of my descendants up. And today it's prevalent. Today it's immediate. It's on an Instagram page. It's on the website. It's easy to see, easy to find. And it makes a lot of sense because it gives people an assurance and it gives the brand an additional sex appeal,
Sure.
credibility. I love his design. Then I look into who he is and he is also a descendant of Louis Cartier. I also take great pride of it now because I've had an opportunity to think of myself as an innovator for something we talked about a little bit earlier, where I don't take people's ideas. I don't want it. If somebody's thought about it and I have nothing to add or nothing to transform, nothing to change, then I don't want to use it because then I don't feel like it belongs to me.
It's interesting with the legacy, right? Because it's one thing to go work in the family business or assume some role. It's a very different thing to go and actually pursue that same path yourself.
You would never, if you ask me, like I mentioned earlier, I never imagined that would be my path. As a matter of fact, the day I got called in for that interview at that jewelry company, I was selected to and hired to go into commercial real estate.
Really?
Yeah. That day. Like literally I had been offered the job at a commercial real estate company that I had interviewed with extensively. And then my mother, who knew the headhunter of that jewelry company, gets a call that says, "What's your son doing?" And he proceeds to say, I think it'd be great for this job.
Why do you think he thought you would be great? Was it because of this innate sort of
Yeah.
sociability that you had, or?
Yeah, personality, who I was in the world. Right. One thing that I found really interesting in life that I share with people when they're looking for themselves, I said, you have to start by looking how the world sees you, right? Not your own perception or low self-esteem or insecurities and all that stuff. That's just built in and that's you. But there is a certain thing that you project in the world. And if people see you as charming and charismatic and smart and likable and articulate and whatever else other quality, then you have to take that at face value. And you have to speak of yourself that way, because that's what the world is seeing. And I think like all through my life, people saw something in me that I wasn't necessarily seeing. My life is a series of errors and failures, and I carry a lot. I don't know if you're interested in any of this in the context of
It all builds up to the learnings on the way.
yeah,
right?
the learnings on the way and meeting a lot of people along the way that really saw something in me that I wasn't seeing.
And so it feels like this early part of your career, you come into this role as a young jewelry salesperson and you're ascending quickly. Are there a lot of other people your age in these stores? Or I imagine you're probably the youngest by a pretty wide margin.
At the time, I was definitely the youngest, especially the kind of jewelry I was representing.
So you had this initial period, you started learning more about the stones and the craft, and then you had your first sale. And it sounds like after that, you started gaining some momentum and you're starting to travel around the world and all this.
Then I had big sales, and then the thrill of selling these very expensive pieces of jewelry was honestly just incredible and irresistible.
Yeah. When did you start to think, hey, I could do this myself?
I remember I think like it came with a combination of two things. I felt like working in a retail environment was too constricted for me. So I felt like I was just holding myself back from being able to express myself more, but I didn't necessarily understand that this came with becoming a jewelry designer. At first, I had these ideas like, oh, I'd love to do what is well known today as micro pave, which I wanted to cover metal with diamonds, like everywhere. I wanted to see no metal because I think metal is dull. Obviously, I've evolved, but at the time, I was like, it's really dull. I just want to see brightness and diamonds sparkling. I wanted to cover everything with very small diamonds. I even embarked into these discussions of starting our own thing with the head of the workshop at the time and another really brilliant salesman. And we're like, let's do it on our own. And because it emboldens you. When you work for very large brands that have this stream of customers that come through the door, there is a little point where you think, oh, I could do this. But the truth is these people pass the door because the brand you're working for is 100 years old and they're coming for that brand.
Yep.
You happen to be an accessory to that. It's just, I thought of it, oh, I could design the ring this way or that way. I don't want to work in retail anymore. I wanted to do it on my own. That's the burgeoning of the ideas, but that doesn't come to fruition. This is maybe 5 to 7 years into my career. So this is a long time ago from where we are today. But it makes its way little by little.
The idea is forming.
The idea is forming, and then it doesn't materialize because that would require to leave my job. That would require for all of us to leave our jobs. So it's more like an impulse, an idea, and then we just move on. And I think that plants the seed for what comes much later, or probably 10 years later, becomes like the decision to actually start a jewelry brand.
And how did
from
that
scratch.
How did that play out? There's like, what happens in between you work at these jewelry houses in Paris and then something transpires and then all of a sudden you're in Los Angeles. How did you get there?
So I traveled the world. Between that moment and the moment where I decided to start, I always wanted to travel. So I started taking these jewelry brands and representing them in different countries. Went to Asia. I went all over the world representing this jewelry. And I loved this idea that I was young and being able to travel, including flying in business class when I was in my 20s and staying in the most famous hotels around the world. This whole thing is a little bit of a dream.
Yeah.
It's not just the jewelry. It's everything that came with
The
it.
lifestyle.
Yeah, the accoutrements of jewelry was just thrilling to me.
So why did you leave this?
Then that ran its course, and then all of a sudden I'm in retail again. Now I'm managing retail stores, and life happens and things change. And then eventually I just didn't want to be confined in retail anymore. It was too slow paced for me. That was like one of the deciding factors. And then something happened in the jewelry industry at large that was like a key moment. Diamonds became available online. And if you come from where I trained and where I learned everything, diamonds, gemstones, prices, everything was shrouded in secrecy. 30 years ago, nobody knew what a diamond cost. Like nobody in the public knew what a diamond cost. People barely understood diamonds except that they were incredibly expensive and rare and mystical, right? And then all of a sudden, fast forward 15 years, this company named Blue Nile lists diamonds online with all the information, and all of a sudden was a huge amount of education, and the price and the obscurity and the mystery of diamonds as you knew it the day before is gone. And that is a revolution as big as jewelry has had at that time.
Okay.
Whoa. Now there's all these diamonds that are like publicly available for you to see. And then all of a sudden it just reframed everything. People were like, okay, so I could buy a diamond for a lot less money. Now I'm starting to understand, finding the education to understand what's color, what's clarity, what are the different components that make a diamond.
Had you already been trained on this?
Yeah, already.
So you knew all the...
Me, I was an insider.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, my inside information is available outside.
For everybody to see.
So I thought that was groundbreaking.
Yeah.
I actually thought, wow. While everybody was freaking out, I was like, this is really exciting.
That's cool.
So what that company was doing was literally just delivering sort of the commodity aspect of the diamond, and they had removed all the charm. Mm-hmm. There was no tradition to it. There was no craftsmanship to it. There was no storytelling to it. There was no branding.
It was just a catalog of stones.
Just catalog of stones, jam it on the setting, basic setting, and off you are. Right? So for the deal seekers out there, for the people that were wanting to buy diamonds and were just like up against the price of diamond, that's like incredibly liberating. I'm like, okay, so they're creating an opportunity, but I think people still need the rest. And the rest being the sentiment and the storytelling and the craftsmanship and the background. So I was like, I'm going to bring in the traditional way of jewelry that I have learned from these companies that I now have, my own spin on it, and I'm going to make traditional artistry for the modern consumer. I'm going to give them the rest of the equation.
And so was this the moment where it clicked for you? Like, I can do this, and the online aspect of it, was that what pushed you over the edge? Or
Definitely.
what do you think was the bigger sort of disruption to this industry? Do you think it was diamonds becoming available online or lab-grown diamonds?
Well, then that's, if we fast forward to where we are today, the biggest one is lab diamonds by a long stretch. Putting diamonds online was an evolution. Lab-grown diamond is a revolution. Consumers never had an option. They only had option A. Diamonds, natural diamonds, coming from the ground, extracted by what used to be one company, De Beers, and now 3-4 miners, big miners, who are controlling the entire pipeline. And this is what you have to choose from. So there's one source, one market, pretty much controlled, one seller, and then all of a sudden, there is option B. And it's the same thing, same product, same diamond, same beauty, same everything, but different origin at a vastly different price. Which is, I don't think we can think of an industry, I haven't to this day thought of an industry that was entirely based on that option A, and that all of a sudden there's a completely disruptive, existential option B that threatens this entire industry as it's being adopted. You can think of technologies in many ways, right? But this is, sometimes I thought of it like, we were all going to Blockbusters, and then all of a sudden Netflix is on the map, and lo and behold, nobody uses a tape or a DVD ever. There's probably maybe a small version, but everything has gone digital. It's that magnitude, except that there was storytelling and aura and history connected to diamonds and jewelry in general that made it seem like this was going to last forever. No pun intended.
Yeah.
Like diamonds forever, genius marketing, all of that. But why it's so interesting to me is I had some discomfort about the tension around diamonds. People were always compromising. People were always like letting themselves down because they needed to pick a smaller stone or less quality stones. And yes, the moment the purchase itself was exciting, the process was exciting, but lab diamonds just delivered everything people have been looking for. That's why the penetration is so fast. And I love it.
So it sounds like you're now in LA, diamonds come onto the internet, you start thinking about this. What's next? At what point do you actually hang up your shingle and start the business?
It's based on the way I used to sell engagement rings to people 15 years earlier.
At these big jewelry houses?
Big jewelry houses. I was like, okay, so we need to make the process simple, and we need to give people less. We need to give people the right amount of choices, and these choices needs to be curated. So when these diamonds appeared online, one thing they did is just it poured out a whole number of stones. And if at the time and still today, diamonds are not cut equal except for rounds, every other diamond doesn't follow a perfect mathematical equation. And therefore, some of the diamonds were prettier than others, to make this simple for the audience. And so I decided I'm going to build it around curation, simplifying people's process of understanding and selecting diamonds, as well as engagement rings. So I'm going to simplify the number of designs. I'm going to simplify the number of stones that you can choose from to make this more of a pleasurable experience rather than something that is a little daunting,
Yeah.
to be
It
honest.
can be intimidating to go to one of these stores and you're talking with someone who knows so much more about it. And
you know nothing, and this
Yeah.
is a big moment in your life, and you're expected to spend the largest amount of money you've ever spent, and it's not even on yourself. Not really,
yeah,
right? So there's all of this comes emotionally charged, and then the jewelry as we knew it makes it intimidating, and then this new option of finding diamonds online makes it even more daunting. The prices are great, but the choice is overwhelming.
so you saw a need to, you have now this a million options because they're online, but so your perspective was this now needs to be, it's accessible, but it needs to be simplified.
I'm
Is
going to
that
recommend
fair?
you. Yeah. So my first website ever had 3 steps. The first step, you decided what shape you wanted for your diamond. The second step were little piggy banks, one small, one medium, one large one. That's my first web design. And then it would give you a price range,
What year was this?
15 years ago,
15
maybe.
years ago.
And then the third step, I would recommend you 3 diamonds. Because one diamond, if I show you one diamond, I'm telling you what to do. 2 feels like you need a third to just zero in on the other one. So I came up with the idea of 3 stones. And that was the first website I ever built, was my little piggy banks and 3 diamonds. It was not sustainable. It was not scalable. But this was when I wrote what I think the brand should say and look like. I didn't have a lot of resources. I couldn't put a lot into that. But I definitely wrote a roadmap for what the brand would be like, what would be the cornerstones of our narrative,
The mission.
the value, the mission statement. This company started from literally myself and the first person I hired, and blank piece of paper, 1 laptop, and 1 screen. And here we go. Where do we start? The story goes, I actually built an eBay store. It's the first thing I ever built.
And what were you selling on the eBay store?
That's where I wrote
Your own
that's where
designs?
that's where I wrote the story. The eBay store I only sold 1 ring on eBay, but the eBay store gave me a small, confined platform to lay down my ideas about what Jean Dousset brand was about, what were our sort of qualities, value prop. That's how I built it. I built that eBay store. That's my draft, if you will, of what Jean Dousset was going to be.
And I'm curious, so you had this experience earlier in your career. At this point, you know about you've learned about the stones, how to sell, what that sort of experience should be like for the customer. But at what point did you actually start to learn how to make the piece of jewelry, sketching it out, or how did that?
Just imagination, ideas, concepts that I think what a ring should look like at the time. And then I found a little workshop, a one-man show, a guy that I knew from back in the day when I worked at Van Cleef, who was doing repairs for us. But he had the skills, and he had seen a lot of Van Cleef pieces over the years. And then I teamed up with him. It's the story of every business you start. You meet the right people at the time, and they allow you to move 100 yards. And at that 100 yards, you're going to need something a little extra, a little more, and then you build something on top of it, and then you find a new guy, and then you know that you need more in order to grow. It's that people call it the grind, but it's also all these small little evolution steps, like little bit by little. It's just like when all of a sudden you get a call from this guy in Florida who found our website, and he wants to buy a $20,000 ring.
This was back when you had the piggy bank website with the 3 options, or?
Yes. I was like, wow. How does this guy, found me, decide to give me a call, and decided that he's going to travel cross country for me to make a ring?
Wow.
Probably a little bit of everything that's on the site. I made a ring for a celebrity. I am a descendant of Louis Cartier. By then, I have written in my little story about what I believe in, what I can do to help you, how am I going to do it. And the guy said, okay, I'm going to give this guy a chance. And then there's another one, and then another one. And at first, it's just little sales.
So were you were making all kind of one-off pieces? So someone would
Only
come to
made to
you.
order.
Okay.
I
So
never, for 10 years, I never had inventory.
okay. So that's how you bootstrap a jewelry brand. You just build
You
custom.
build custom made to order. You tell people one after the other to take a leap of faith.
The show's called Learnings at Scale. This feels like obviously a big inflection point in your life and career now. You're building the brand. What do you think were some of the most significant or most important kind of lessons that you had early in your career that set you up for this? Was there anything in particular where you look back and just thought, wow, I'm so glad I had that experience?
I think the only thing I knew really well was jewelry. Like I knew how to pick them. I know how to choose diamonds, how to identify them. I knew jewelry making, and I knew how customers, clients feel on the other side of the table, where they're coming from, what they're looking for as an experience. The rest, honestly, I learned it all. I didn't go to school. I don't have a higher education, didn't go to university, certainly not business school. So this is bootstrapping at every level you can think of. And
Self-taught.
Self-taught, and then with that comes mistakes or insecurities because you don't really understand everything about business and you just learn along the way. I can say that the one thing that has not changed is I didn't make any branding errors since day one. Like the brand, what I believe in, how I see it, how I present it.
You can look back at every era and feel
it's consistent. Okay. I've never say, oh, this is not working. I need to be someone else. This is the same Jean Dousset brand, the same presentation I made to that guy who called me and gave me a chance, took a leap of faith, is the same exact thing we tell thousands of people today or hundreds of thousands of people today on a website. Right? It's the same narrative, same vocabulary, same approach, same presentation, more evolved because more resources have gone into it, but that's never changed. What has been happening along the way is the business learnings. What do I need to do next? What do I want to be?
How did you learn that? What was your process in the early days when it's just you finding customers and selling one-off pieces? How did you learn the skills that you needed to learn at that time? Building a business, obviously you have to do everything at day one, from figuring out how to form a company to all the practical, boring stuff to the exciting stuff. How did you figure all that out?
I had this incredible woman who was my first hire, who is still with me today, who was just a rock. And between her skill set and mine, we were just able to go through these early bootstrapping years. We started at home, and then I rented an office 3 days a week. And then I rented that office monthly, month to month, in one of those office suites. And then one day I said, if I stay here, I'm going to die as a designer because my name is nowhere. I'm working out of an office. I need to put myself out there. And that's when I decided to open a showroom. First people that I went to see to open a showroom, they said, what do you have? Do you have any references? Do you have any credit? I was like, no, all I know is that I need a door on the street with my name on it. And then somebody gave me a chance. I didn't have any guarantees. I had nothing to offer, but somebody gave me a chance. That's when I opened the first boutique. And then I painted it, and it was cement floors, and I went to buy on eBay an old safe because I wanted to decorate it and create a little bit of decor. And it's just this long, slow evolution of growth and progress. This looks nothing like this brand, some of the brands that we see today that people think just came out of the ground in the last 6 months. Some of them do, but they're bankrolled by hundreds of millions of dollars in private equity or whatever. I started a brand like a lot of people have, and I think that by the time it's of any significant size that people know who you are, probably 20 plus years will have elapsed. If you think of some of the designers that you know today and you look at the documentaries or read their stories, they didn't just pop up. Like they've been working on it for 25 years.
How do you build that intentionally? That seems like it could be something that's so daunting. You're on day zero and you're on this path where you want to build Jean Dousset as a namesake brand. How do you think about that?
On day zero, you don't think about day 5,000.
Right.
It's a small building block. And if by the end of the day, on day one, I had written a few thoughts about who I want Jean Dousset to be, that's a victory.
It sounded like you had this clarity on what the vision and the mission and what the brand would
Yeah,
be
but I
from
have
those early days.
but I have no idea of the scope. I have no idea what critical mass it can get
Okay.
to, what size it could be. Like I wasn't dreaming of having 100 boutiques and be the largest. I didn't have any sort of, my goals were not set by what I think it should be like in 20 years or what it could be like. At the time, it was just like, I'm going to start something of my own. And I want my jewelry to look this way, and this is what I want it to sound like. And then every customer that bought a ring from me allowed me to take one more step.
And so what was the drive? Where did the motivation come from?
I think it's just a realization of who you want to be. It's like, it's a personal growth project. This is what my idea is. I feel very comfortable in that environment. This is what I know. And because of that evolution of diamonds being online, I think there is a new crop of jewelry brands, a new breed of jewelrymen that could exist to cater to that next generation. And I thought that was the starter.
So was there a point now when you're in the early days and you're creating these custom pieces, was there a point or a sale, was some specific event where you thought, oh, wow, we can really do this? And then what led you to start building the Jean Dousset up today? Of course, you talked about this period without any inventory. And then I imagine that must have been quite a shift to get to the point where you have a website with inventory and boutiques and all that. What gave you that confidence to think, okay, we can really do this?
Your sense of growth comes from the amount of the price of the rings that you sell. As that number grows, you feel more legitimate, okay? When you start selling $100,000 ring, $200,000 ring, those are huge milestones. First of all, they give you a financial boost that you have not had because of the sheer amount of money involved. And they also give you a newfound sense of accomplishment because somebody has decided to pick you to spend several $100,000 on a ring or on a diamond. That's big. As far as confidence, that's how you measure your evolution. That's how I measured my evolution at the beginning. I stayed in the same space for 10 years. So I renovated it, I enhanced it, but the business grew by the price of the stones I sold and the number of rings I sold, but it was still very small. And then as that grew, industry paid attention to me more. And then I was approached by large jewelry retailers who wanted to sell Jean Dousset as part of their portfolio. So I was like, oh, A, that's flattering. And B, maybe there is more to this. Like maybe I can grow. And then this is when you start thinking, I need to look for investments. And that's a whole new world of business, entrepreneurship. You just bootstrap it. And then one sale leading to another gives you enough resources. And all of a sudden, like, oh, I want to be bigger.
Right.
I'd like to be bigger. I think I can do more. Then you start the fundraising period of your entrepreneurial life, and that just changes everything.
How did you kind of learn about that? Was it these jewelry brands approaching you and then sparking the thought of, oh, maybe other people would be interested in this? Or
well, there is that, and then the fact that my average order value was very high. It was above $30,000 for a number of years. I knew enough about jewelry to know that's not the norm.
Right.
And that's not where the market at large is. And these retailers were operating more in the $3,000 to $10,000 range. So if they saw a possibility, an opportunity for for their consumer to respond well to Jean Dousset brand design aesthetic, then I figured, well, I could do that. How do I do that? So I did work with some of these big retailers, but that's what opened my eyes to, I could scale, I could do that. And then the conundrum became, how do I do that? How do I make jewelry that I can sell in that price range? Because that I had never done before. And at the time, the only way to sell a diamond for less money was to shrink the size of the diamond and to lower the quality. So in order for me to be a player or a part of that new segment,
it was going to limit your creativity.
It was going to lower my standards.
Okay.
And so for a number of years, I worked on developing how do I make that without sacrificing my standards.
Okay.
And so through design approach, how to make rings look bigger and make diamonds look bigger through craftsmanship. So that was the whole work that I did for a number of years. I did a lot of research. I went to work with UCLA Business School on a case study. How does Jean Dousset grow? Eventually, I came together with an idea of how to accomplish it. So having an offering that was more affordable, not trashing the quality of the stones I was going to sell, still upholding a great standard of craftsmanship. That came to be. It had a name. We launched it right after, around the pandemic. It didn't work. I wasn't very excited about it, but I was committed to it.
And so was this a different brand, or was this under the Jean
It was
Dousset?
called Oui by Jean Dousset
Okay.
at the time. So I was looking to make Jean Dousset more affordable, but I did not want to sacrifice everything. And then people had been talking to me about lab-grown diamonds. At the time, they were not ready, which means they were growing diamonds that were not cutting them well. And also GIA, which is like the reference of gemological certification, had not embraced it yet. And then fast forward, all of a sudden, the proper know-how has been transferred into the lab-grown space by people in the natural space. They're now cutting them properly, like the diamonds I expect to see and recommend to clients. And it's GIA certified. To me, that was like the green light to strong consideration of adopting lab-grown diamonds. And then I made a decision one day. And it was everything I've always been looking for. Everything that I did not like about my career or my environment, which was super elite, obscenely expensive, filled with tension and compromise. Everything that I just wish could go away is to make it just like about exceptional craftsmanship, and you can have the diamond that you want and at a quality that looks good for diamonds. Lab Diamond delivered all of it.
So it was like this huge unlock for you.
A huge unlock. I'm like, not only it's an unlock for me, but I'm going to unlock this for everybody. So obviously, I'm talking about a 30-year career by then.
Yeah.
Not an easy step to take, but I retooled Oui by Jean Dousset, which wasn't working, rewrote the whole story, and made that our lab-grown experiment.
Okay.
So I relaunched Oui by Jean Dousset with lab-grown offering,
Okay.
kept the natural business alive, offered both, but really focused all my energy on lab. And then I think like a month into it, I said, I'm going to pivot entirely. People told me, slow down. This is crazy. You can never come back from this. I'm like, okay, I get it. Fair enough. I'm going to slow down. And then I think 2 months later, I said, I want everything to do with lab diamonds. And I just want to turn the page. I didn't turn my back on natural diamonds or everything that I've learned and everything that I love about that. I just want to evolve and lean into the future and take a risk.
Yeah.
This is risky. For me, who has built a foundation as a jewelry designer, as a descendant of Cartier, it's like the epitome of traditions. Leaning into and adopting lab-grown diamond is not a well-received news from my peers.
Right.
But I loved it.
Did you seek out to disrupt the industry? Was that ever? You come from this the sort of like, how would you describe it? The most classic place in the world, and that's where you started your career. And now we've talked about these disruptions, right? Diamonds coming onto the internet, and then lab diamonds. And obviously, you've been a part of that disruption in the industry as an entrepreneur with a business that's selling lab diamond jewelry online. Was that more of a byproduct, like it just these things facilitated you creating, or did you actively want to disrupt?
I always want to have my own point of view and be an innovator. And this is how you come full circle with Louis Cartier. Louis Cartier was an innovator of his time. Wristwatch, platinum, baguette diamonds. He also associated himself with fashion, where people said, you got to stay in your lane. He did a lot of things that were very creative. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I guess I'm just living up to that. Maybe that's what's flowing through my veins. And I love the idea that I was doing something that was not risky, but bold. Because the same way I don't want to copy people, I don't want to just follow the train when it's an all clear that it's safe.
Yep.
And honestly, I just followed really what I felt really strongly about. I didn't have to talk to a focus group or talk to a million friends to ask them, do you think I should do lab grown diamonds? And people around me pushed back. That's crazy. Blah, blah, blah.
You're saying it felt obvious to you. Or,
Obvious. Like, it's like, no question I need to do this. This is where I need to be. This is actually, I think that everything I've done before was to be meeting this moment. Everything I was looking for to accomplish as a brand, Jean Dousset, was done not knowing that it would come to be for that moment. I embraced lab diamonds immediately, very strongly. I see it as the future. I see it as resetting the scale, utter liberation for consumers, the ability to give people the quality that is most attractive. There's diamonds, as you know, can look a million different ways depending on their color and the number of inclusion. Lab-grown diamonds gives you and everybody else a chance at wearing quality diamonds. And diamonds look their best when they're of a high quality. Other than that, they're just diamonds. When they're a little yellow and a little dirty and a little blurry, it's just a diamond, but it's not very pretty. But when a diamond is really exceptionally white and really well cut, it's stunning. People don't like diamonds just because of the mystique and everything that surrounds it. Yes, that's one part. But also of all the gemstones available, it is the most striking and the most beautiful. When it hits the light, diamonds produce a scintillation and a refraction unrivaled in any other gemstones. That's why it has an enduring power. Not only that, but the fact that it's been in people's mind, people have been wanting diamonds for so long that now the fact that we can make it more affordable, remember, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
It's cheaper.
Yeah, they're still quite expensive.
And it's still mounted in precious metals. It still involves jewelry making, so it's still a luxury product by every measure.
It's just not only for the 0.01%.
Correct.
Yeah. Hearing you talk about this, one thing I'm curious about is now we're in this world where now diamonds are online, there are lab diamonds, there are these things that make it more accessible, more people can get into this. What would you say if there's a kid listening to this that's dreaming of being a jewelry designer and now because of these things, it's a thing that they could do? What would be your advice to them, having walked this path?
I think that in just every other adventure, endeavor, artistic or aesthetic or creative, for everybody who wants to do it, there will be just a very small number of people that will actually succeed. But the only way to find out is to develop yourself, explore yourself as a creator, as a designer, and then I think heed the signs. If people see something in what you do, then keep going. But if nobody validates it, you won't find joy in it, right? So I think it's also like being able to recognize when it doesn't work. For all the success I've had designing, creating, branding, and all that stuff, there's been a lot of business pain. Building a business is very difficult. It's very taxing. It's full of anxiety and fears. And when you think you just grew, you actually just made a very small step. And then there's many more steps. And with every step becomes a challenge. Am I way bigger, way more evolved than I was 10 years ago? Certainly. But with that comes different challenges. How do we grow more? How do we do this? How do we open boutiques? So I think it's just an exploration.
It reminds me of this saying from a famous cyclist: it never gets easier, you just go faster.
That's what it is. Every new stage has its own challenges. It sounds a little cliche, but you know, the only thing is when you do stumble, when something is not working, it's not about the brand and the product. All of that works. But how do you grow it? When it's not working, the ability to recognize it and to make a change is really where the growth is. Yeah. Even just like you do personally.
Absolutely. Jean, it's been a pleasure. I could probably keep asking you questions
Thank
here,
you so
but it's been great chatting with you. Where can people find you?
On jeandousset.com, JeanDoussett.com, and on Instagram, obviously, Jean Dousset.
We'll make sure to link to your website
Thank you
and
so
all
much.
your socials in the show notes or the description below.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm Mac though.
Oh, Max, keep that.
I should keep that. That's going to be great.